The 43rd President of the United States is George W. Bush. On January 20th, 2001, he was sworn into office. On November 2nd, 2004, he was re-elected, and on January 20th, 2005, he was sworn in for a second term. President Bush served as the 46th governor of Texas for 6 years prior to taking office. During that time, he developed a reputation for bipartisanship and as a sympathetic conservative who shaped public policy based on the ideas of small government, individual responsibility, strong families, and local control. George Walker Bush, or George W. Bush, was born in New Haven, Connecticut in the United States on July 6, 1946. As the 43rd President of the United States, in office from 2001 to 2009, he oversaw the nation's reaction to the terrorist attacks of September 11th in 2001 and launched the Iraq War in 2003. George W. Bush became the first president since Benjamin Harrison in 1888 to be elected, despite losing the national popular vote after narrowly defeating Vice President Al Gore in one of the most contentious and close elections in American history in the year 2000. Bush had two positions before to being elected president: businessman and Texas governor, 1995-2000. Early life Bush was the oldest of George H.W. Bush's 6 children. George H.W. Bush was the 41st President of the United States, 1989-1993. Prescott Bush, his paternal grandpa, served as a senator for Connecticut from 1952 until 1963. Texas's Midland and Houston served as the younger Bush's primary places of residence. He attended the boarding school Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where his father had graduated from 1961 to 1964. His father's and grandfather's Alma School, Yale University, awarded him a bachelor's degree in history in 1968. Like his father, Bush served as president of his fraternity and was part of Yale's exclusive Skull and Bones Society. But unlike his father, he was merely a mediocre student and did not stand out in sports. The Texas Air National Guard, whose personnel were less likely than regular soldiers to serve in the Vietnam War, accepted Bush's application for a position as a pilot trainee in May 1968, 2 weeks before his Yale graduation and the expiration of his student service deferment. He was appointed a second lieutenant in July 1968, and in June 1970, he earned his fighter pilot certification. He attempted to enroll in the University of Texas Law School in the autumn of 1970, but was denied. Bush received an early discharge in order to enroll in Harvard Business School in the autumn of 1973, despite missing at least 8 months of duty between May 1972 and May 1973. His patchy military record came up again as a campaign issue in the presidential elections in 2000 and 2004. After graduating from Harvard with an MBA in 1975, Bush went to Midland and started working for a family friend who was an oil and gas lawyer. Later, he established his own oil and gas company. In 1977, he wed librarian and teacher Laura Welch in Midland. Following a failed bid for Congress in 1978, Bush focused on growing his company. Bush was able to draw in a large number of illustrious investors with the aid of his uncle, who was at the time soliciting money for Bush's father's candidature for the Republican presidential nomination. Before the inevitable fall of oil prices in 1986, when the company was eventually acquired by the Harkin Energy Corporation, it struggled through the early 1980s. Bush was given shares of Harkin, a position as a consultant for the business, and a directorship. Bush stopped drinking alcohol that same year, just after turning 40. He subsequently recalled, "I realized that alcohol was crowding out my energies and could, eventually, crowd out my affections for other people." His choice was somewhat influenced by what he regarded as a spiritual awakening and a deepening of his Christian faith that had started the year before, following a chat with the Reverend Billy Graham, a friend of the Bush family. After his business was sold, Bush spent 18 months in Washington, D.C., helping his father's presidential campaign as an advisor and wordsmith. After winning the election in 1988, he relocated to Dallas, where he joined forces with a previous business partner to put together a group of financiers to buy the Texas Rangers baseball team. Despite the fact that Bush's investment, which he funded with a loan he secured with his Harkin stock, was rather modest, his position as the team's managing partner gave him considerable media exposure and established his status as a shrewd businessman. In 1998, Bush's partnership sold the squad, and he collected around $15 million as a result. Governor of Texas Bush ran against Democratic incumbent Ann Richards for governor of Texas in 1994. Bush's decision to sell all of his Harkin shares in June 1990, just days before the business finished its second quarter with significant losses, was a major topic of discussion during the campaign. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, did not find any evidence of misconduct during its 1991 inquiry into the possibility of illegal insider trading that benefits from knowledge that is not generally available. Bush became the first child of a U.S. president to be elected a state governor after winning the race with 53% of the vote, compared to 46% for Richards. While serving as governor, Bush expanded state funding for primary and secondary education and tied teacher and administrator wages and promotions to how well their children performed on standardized examinations. His administration lowered the age at which children might be tried as adults to 14 and enlarged the number of offenses for which juveniles could be condemned to adult prisons after being held in juvenile detention. Bush attracted attention from across the world for Texas's quick adoption of the death penalty in comparison to other states throughout his presidency. Bush signed into law a number of tort reform laws, including one that set new punitive damages caps and another that lowered the threshold for gross negligence. Bush was the first Texas governor to win back-to-back four-year terms in 1998, when he was re-elected with nearly 70% of the vote. In 1972, voters supported a referendum that increased the governor's term from 2 to 4 years. George W. Bush formally declared his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination in June 1999. He promoted a political philosophy called compassionate conservatism, which combined traditional Republican economic policies with a focus on helping the underprivileged. Despite avoiding direct answers about his past alcohol and drug use, Bush secured the Republican nomination and gained a significant lead in public opinion polls over his rivals, including Democratic nominee Al Gore, Green Party candidate Ralph Nader, and Reform Party nominee Patrick Buchanan. He chose Dick Cheney, a former chief of staff for President Gerald Ford and Secretary of Defense during his father's presidency, as his running mate. During the general election campaign, the race between Bush and Gore became incredibly close, with the smallest margin in 40 years. The outcome of the election depended on Florida's 25 electoral votes, where Bush initially led Gore by less than 1,000 popular votes following a statewide machine recount. As the Gore campaign requested manual recounts in 4 heavily Democratic counties, the Bush campaign filed a lawsuit in federal court to halt the process. This legal battle extended for 5 weeks, with both state and federal courts considering numerous challenges. Ultimately, the Florida Supreme Court decided by a slim margin, 4-3, to order a statewide manual recount of approximately 45,000 undervotes, ballots that the machines did not clearly register as expressing a presidential vote. Responding swiftly, the Bush campaign appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, requesting a delay in the recounts until their case could be heard. On December 9th, the Supreme Court issued a stay on the recounts. 3 days later, in a highly controversial 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court reversed the Florida Supreme Court's recount order. This effectively granted Bush the presidency by preventing a further recount. Winning Florida meant that Bush narrowly secured the electoral vote with 271 to Gore's 266, with one Gore elector abstaining, just one more than the required 270. Upon his inauguration, George W. Bush became the second son of a former president to assume the highest office in the United States, following in the footsteps of John Quincy Adams, the son of President John Adams. Presidency of George Early Initiatives. Bush, the first Republican president with a majority in both houses of Congress since Eisenhower, proposed a $1.6 trillion tax cut bill in February 2001. Congress passed a compromise bill worth $1.35 billion in June, despite objections from Democrats. However, the Democrats gained control of the Senate in the same month after Senator James Jeffords left the Republican Party. This led to resistance against Bush's domestic initiatives. In May 2001, Vice President Cheney's task force called for increased fossil fuel and nuclear power production, facing a lawsuit to disclose its deliberations. In foreign affairs, Bush rejected the Kyoto Protocol, withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, and opposed the International Criminal Court. The September 11th attacks. On September 11, 2001, President Bush faced a major crisis when Islamist terrorists hijacked 4 American commercial airplanes. 2 planes were flown into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, causing their collapse and extensive damage. Another plane targeted the Pentagon near Washington, D.C., while the 4th crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers tried to regain control. These coordinated attacks, carried out by al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden's leadership, resulted in the deaths of about 3,000 people, making it the deadliest terrorist incident on U.S. soil. Blaming bin Laden and his network, the Bush administration accused the Taliban government of Afghanistan of harboring them. Assembling an international coalition, Bush ordered a massive bombing campaign on Afghanistan starting on October 7, 2001. The Taliban government was swiftly overthrown, and al-Qaeda forces were dispersed, although bin Laden remained at large until his eventual death in 2011. During this period, Bush's approval ratings reached their peak, with some polls showing as high as 90% public approval due to his handling of the September 11th attacks and the war in Afghanistan. Domestic measures. After the September 11th attacks, the Bush administration made domestic security and the fight against terrorism its top priority. A war on terrorism was declared, vowing to defeat every global terrorist group. To coordinate the domestic response, the Department of Homeland Security was established in January 2003. In October 2001, the USA Patriot Act was swiftly passed by Congress, temporarily expanding the search and surveillance powers of law enforcement agencies. In January 2002, Bush authorized the National Security Agency, NSA, to monitor international communications of American citizens without court orders. When this program was revealed in 2005, the administration claimed it was justified under a congressional resolution. Congress debated granting retroactive immunity to telecom companies involved, and in July 2008, legislation expanding the NSA's powers and granting immunity was passed and signed into law by Bush. Treatment of detainees. In January 2002, the United States established a prison complex at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where hundreds of Taliban fighters and suspected al-Qaeda members were held without charge or legal recourse. The Bush administration argued that the prisoners were not entitled to constitutional protections or the rights under the Geneva Conventions. In 2004, a confidential report by the International Committee of the Red Cross revealed that prisoners had been subjected to interrogation techniques considered tantamount to torture. This came after the revelation of abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. In response, Congress passed the Detainee Treatment Act, banning cruel treatment, but Bush added a signing statement reserving his right to disregard the restrictions. The Supreme Court ruled against the administration's military commission system in 2006, and Congress passed the Military Commissions Act, preventing non-U.S. citizen enemy combatants from challenging their detention. The CIA also conducted secret prisons and extraordinary renditions, which led to investigations and controversy. The use of enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, as well as the legal justifications surrounding them, drew criticism and sparked debates on torture. The Iraq War. In January 2002, the United States established a prison complex at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where hundreds of Taliban fighters and suspected al-Qaeda members were held without charge or legal recourse. The Bush administration argued that the prisoners were not entitled to constitutional protections or the rights under the Geneva Conventions. In 2004, a confidential report by the International Committee of the Red Cross revealed that prisoners had been subjected to interrogation techniques considered tantamount to torture. This came after the revelation of abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. In response, Congress passed the Detainee Treatment Act, banning cruel treatment, but Bush added a signing statement reserving his right to disregard the restrictions. The Supreme Court ruled against the administration's military commission system in 2006, and Congress passed the Military Commissions Act, preventing non-U.S. citizen enemy combatants from challenging their detention. The CIA also conducted secret prisons and extraordinary renditions, which led to investigations and controversy. The use of enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, as well as the legal justifications surrounding them, drew criticism and sparked debates on torture. 2006 elections. The lack of progress in the Iraq War, corruption scandals, and the poor response to Hurricane Katrina led to the Democrats winning control of Congress in 2006. The new Congress investigated the NSA spying program and alleged political influence in attorney dismissals. Alberto R. Gonzales, the Attorney General, faced skepticism and resigned, being replaced by Michael Mukasey in 2007. Post-presidential activities. Southern Methodist University, SMU representatives unveiled their construction plans for the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, Texas, in 2008. The George W. Bush Institute, a think tank devoted to research and practical solutions in the areas of education reform, global health, freedom, and economic growth, would be housed in the center together with a presidential library and museum. In 2009, the Institute's inaugural fellows and executive director were chosen. Bush and his wife moved to Dallas when he left office in January 2009. In his first year in retirement, he gave a number of lectures, mostly to small groups of people in private, although he refrained from attacking his Democratic successor, President Barack Obama. In response to Obama's request in January 2010, Bush and former President Bill Clinton took over the management of private fundraising initiatives in the U.S. for disaster assistance in Haiti, which had been hit by a devastating earthquake earlier that month. Later in 2010, Bush released his memoir Decision Points, in which he reiterated his belief that waterboarding does not constitute torture, defended the Iraq War, claimed that he personally approved the waterboarding of an al-Qaeda prisoner, and admitted that the federal government's slow response to Hurricane Katrina. He published the biography of the senior Bush, titled 41, A Portrait of My Father, in 2014. He is a self-taught painter who later released Portraits of Courage, a Commander-in-Chief's Tribute to America's Warriors, 2017, which includes his paintings of veterans. In 2021, the book Out of Many, 1, Portraits of America's Immigrants was published.